Okay, so let's get right into it. The iPhone 17 is here, and honestly, it's one of the strangest, most fascinating stories to come out of Apple in a long, long time. Because on one hand, people are calling it this massive, monumental leap forward. But on the other hand, a lot of people see it as a huge letdown. So, what is actually going on?
And yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? How can a single phone be both revolutionary and kind of underwhelming at the exact same time? Well, to figure that out, you really have to look at the iPhone 17 as two completely separate stories. There's the story of its software, and then there's the story of its hardware.
And this right here just perfectly sums up the problem on the software side. I want you to cast your mind back to WWDC 2024. Remember that? Apple got on stage and promised us this completely transformed, super smart, context-aware Siri that was going to change everything. And the reality now that the phone is out? Well, a headline AI feature is that it automatically adjusts the zoom on your selfies. You can see the huge, huge gap between that promise and what we actually got.
So this brings us to our first big idea, what we're calling the intelligence gap. Because despite all the hype, the whole software side of the iPhone 17, especially Apple Intelligence, it fell flat for a lot of people.
And look, this wasn't just, a few grumpy users online. Tech journalists picked up on it immediately. Abdullah Assam over at Phone Arena put it really bluntly. He said Apple is still struggling to make any worthwhile progress in AI. Ouch. That suggests this is a much deeper problem than just a couple of features being delayed.
So what do we end up with at launch? If you boil it all down, Apple Intelligence on the iPhone 17 really only came with two big new features. First, like we said, is that auto-zooming selfie camera. The second is a new adaptive power mode, which is supposed to learn your habits to save battery life. I mean, is that useful? Sure, maybe. But is it the AI revolution we were all waiting for? Not even close.
But here's the twist. That is only half the story. Because while all this was happening on the software side, this kind of disappointment, Apple was quietly pulling off a total revolution with the phone's hardware. And this is where the story gets really, really good.
And what's so telling is where the biggest praise is going. It's focused on the base model. PC Mag's Eric Zeman gave their Editor's Choice Award not to the most expensive Pro Max, but to the standard iPhone 17. He called it the best iPhone for the money. And that is a huge deal because it shows that Apple is finally bringing its best features down to the model that more people can actually afford.
I mean, just look at this list. For the first time ever, the standard iPhone gets that super smooth ProMotion display. It gets the always-on display. The screen itself is bigger, it's way brighter, and get this, Apple doubled the storage you get at the entry level to 256 gigs. All of these used to be Pro features, and now they're standard. It makes the base iPhone an absolute beast. And the upgrades didn't stop at the screen. Charging speed, something people have complained about for years, got a serious bump. The new Pro models can handle up to 40-watt charging, which means in just 30 minutes, you can get to a 67% charge. That's a huge jump from last year, and a difference you can actually feel in the real world when you're in a hurry.
And then, you've got the cameras. So Apple is marketing the Pro models as having 8 lenses, which, sounds a little crazy for a phone with 3 physical cameras. But here's how they do it. It's actually pretty clever. They use the high-resolution sensors on the main and telephoto cameras to do a sensor crop, which gives you these optical quality zooms at 2x and 8x. So you end up with all these different focal lengths from just 3 cameras.
But the real star of the show is that new telephoto camera. Apple gave it a much bigger 48-megapixel sensor this year, and the experts are loving it. Lux Camera Blog called it a tremendous upgrade, and even said it might well be reason alone to upgrade. That's how much of a game changer that new 4x optical zoom is for anyone who loves taking photos.
Okay, so the specs are obviously impressive, but what does all this new hardware actually do? Like, how does it change how you use the phone day to day? Well, we're a few months in now, and the long-term reviews are starting to show some really surprising things about how people's habits are changing.
And just check this out. This is a wild stat from a Tech Radar review. One person who was tracking their usage reported that their recreational screen time, for fun, almost doubled after they upgraded. It went from about 2 hours a day to nearly 4. The hardware is so good, it's literally making people want to use their phones way more.
So why the huge jump? Well, it's a mix of all these hardware upgrades working together. That new A19 Pro chip plus the better battery means you can play demanding games and not even think about your battery percentage. The camera is so good now that people are saying for the first time they feel comfortable leaving their big dedicated cameras at home. And just everything, opening apps, switching tasks, it all just feels noticeably faster.
But of course, an iPhone doesn't exist in a bubble. To really get a sense of its power, you've got to put the top-of-the-line Pro Max model head-to-head with its biggest rival on the planet, the Samsung Galaxy S26 Ultra.
And just on paper, the tail of the tape is fascinating. The iPhone is actually $100 cheaper to start, but it's also a little bit heavier. But then look at the specs where Samsung pulls ahead. A massive 200-megapixel main camera and faster 60-watt charging. Apple's sitting there with 48 megapixels and 40 watts. So it's a real trade-off.
But, as we all know, specs aren't the whole story. Let's talk performance. When we look at single-core speed, which is really a measure of how quick the phone feels for everyday stuff like opening an app or scrolling through your feed, the iPhone's A19 Pro chip has a clear lead here. It's almost 10% faster. But then, and this is where it gets interesting, you look at multi-core performance. This is what matters for those really heavy tasks, like editing a video or playing a high-end game. And here, the Snapdragon chip in the Galaxy actually pulls ahead. The takeaway here is that this race is incredibly close. Neither phone is just blowing the other one out of the water.
And all of this brings us right back to where we started. You've got these two completely opposite narratives. You have this software experience that just feels incomplete, and at the same time you have this hardware platform that is, without a doubt, one of the best Apple has ever made.
And that really is the central paradox of the iPhone 17, isn't it? What we have here is a device with an unbelievable amount of raw power and potential. It's some of the most impressive mobile hardware anyone has ever built. But it feels like all that incredible hardware is just sitting there, in a holding pattern, just waiting for the truly intelligent software that Apple promised to finally show up and unlock its full potential.
So, I guess it leaves us all with a pretty fundamental question. When you think about your next phone, what's actually more important to you? Is it the promise of smarter software that might be coming down the road, or is it the undeniable power of the hardware that you can actually hold in your hand today? It really is the defining question for this entire generation of phones.